The soft glow of my laptop illuminated the darkness of my penthouse as I, Avery Chen, scrolled through photos from the Winthrop Foundation Gala. The images felt like daggers to my heart. Carter Williams, the man who had been my fiancé just 6 weeks earlier, standing proudly beside Charlotte Winthrop, his arm possessively wrapped around her slender waist. The $100,000 donation that had secured their place at the head table had come from my money, from the account we had shared during our 3-year relationship, a relationship I had believed was building toward marriage, family, and forever. At 32, I had achieved what most would consider the American dream. The daughter of Chinese immigrants who had arrived in San Francisco with nothing but determination and intelligence, I had built a cybersecurity company from my Stanford dorm room and sold it for $340 million before my 30th birthday. I was the poster child for Silicon Valley success, first-generation wealth, self-made, respected in tech circles for innovations rather than connections. My parents had taught me the value of hard work, integrity, and humility, values that had shaped my approach to both business and relationships. Then I met Carter at a charity auction benefiting educational technology for underserved communities. He'd been charming, attentive, and seemingly passionate about technological solutions to social problems. With his perfect smile, impeccable wardrobe, and Stanford MBA, he represented a world adjacent to mine, yet distinctly different. Polished, refined, connected. When he asked me to coffee, I'd been flattered by his interest. When he proposed 18 months later on a private beach in Maui, I'd believed I had found my partner in every sense of the word. The memory of that proposal now burned like acid in my chest. I closed the browser window displaying the gala photos, unable to bear another moment of seeing what had been rightfully mine now claimed by Boston's most eligible socialite. Charlotte Winthrop, fourth-generation wealth, impeccable lineage, connections to political dynasties, and a family name that opened doors no amount of new money could unlock. I hadn't seen the signs, or perhaps I had chosen to ignore them. Carter's growing insistence on attending the right events, his subtle criticisms of my wardrobe choices, the way he had gradually steered our social life away from my tech colleagues toward the established elite of San Francisco, New York, and Boston. The investment fund he had started with a significant loan from me, which had never generated returns but had positioned him as a player in financial circles. The Italian marble countertop felt cool against my palms as I steadied myself, fighting back the tears that had become my nightly companions. 6 weeks had passed since that rainy Tuesday when Carter had sat across from me at our favorite restaurant, his expression solemn as he explained that our life trajectories were diverging. He had spoken as if reading from a prepared script, using phrases like mutual growth and different visions for the future. Not once had he mentioned Charlotte's name, though they had been photographed together at the Boston Symphony Gala just 3 days later. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Layla. "You're looking at the pictures again, aren't you? Stop torturing yourself. Come over. I have wine and zero sympathy for assholes who trade up for colonial money." I almost smiled at Layla's directness. As my former VP of product development and current business partner in our venture capital firm focusing on women-led startups, she had never trusted Carter. "He looks at you like you're a merger acquisition, not a fiancé," she had observed after our engagement party. I had dismissed her concerns as protective cynicism. Now her warnings echoed as prophecy rather than paranoia. The invitation had arrived yesterday. Heavy cream cardstock with gold embossing announcing the union of Charlotte Elizabeth Winthrop and Carter James Williams at Trinity Church in Boston, followed by a reception at the Winthrop estate in Beacon Hill. The June wedding, just 4 months away, would be the social event of the season. An invitation addressed to me. A deliberate cruelty that Charlotte had likely orchestrated to demonstrate her complete victory. I poured myself another glass of Macallan 25, Carter's favorite scotch, which I had developed a taste for during our relationship. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was drowning my sorrows in a luxury he had introduced me to, just as he had introduced me to so many markers of the elite world he coveted, a world that had ultimately valued Charlotte's bloodline over my bank account. The pain came in waves, each one threatening to pull me under completely. First had come the shock and humiliation. seeing their relationship splashed across social media before I had even processed our breakup. Then the anger, white-hot and consuming, as I realized how methodically he had used me, my money, my connections in the tech world, my naive trust, as stepping stones to the life he truly wanted. But tonight, something different crystallized through the hurt. A cold, clear purpose that surprised me with its intensity. I opened my laptop again, this time navigating not to social media, but to financial records. As a tech CEO who had built my fortune in cybersecurity, I understood digital footprints better than most. Carter might have discarded me, but he had left traces of himself throughout my life. Access to accounts, shared passwords, financial entanglements that he had apparently assumed I was too heartbroken to examine. His first mistake was underestimating the woman whose success he had leveraged for his own advancement. I began with our joint investment account, $2.3 million that I had contributed to fund his nascent venture capital firm, Williams Capital. The money had supposedly been invested in early-stage tech companies, though the returns had never materialized. Long-term plays, Carter had assured me whenever I had questioned the lack of performance. Now, with methodical precision, I followed the digital trail of those funds, tracing wire transfers, examining corporate filings, and mapping the network of LLCs Carter had established. What emerged was not a legitimate investment strategy, but a sophisticated shell game, money moving between entities, circular transactions, and approximately $800,000 that had been funneled into personal expenses. The custom Brioni suits that had replaced his off-the-rack wardrobe, the vintage Aston Martin he claimed was essential for client meetings, the Patek Philippe watch that had belonged to his grandfather, but had actually been purchased from a dealer in Geneva. More disturbing were the transfers to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Singapore, classic structures for tax evasion or money laundering. Carter had used my technical illiteracy in financial matters, the one area where I had trustingly deferred to his MBA expertise, to operate what appeared to be a fraudulent investment scheme. As the evidence accumulated on my screen, my tears dried. The crushing pain in my chest didn't disappear, but it transformed into something harder, more focused. Carter Williams had not just broken my heart. He had deliberately exploited my trust, stolen my money, and used my reputation to advance his social climbing agenda. Now he was poised to marry into one of Boston's most powerful families, a union that would cement his place in the world he had always coveted and provide access to the Winthrop fortune, rumored to exceed $1 billion. Edward Winthrop, Charlotte's father, was notoriously protective of the family's assets and reputation. A former federal prosecutor turned private equity magnate, he had reportedly required Charlotte's previous boyfriend to sign an NDA before even meeting the extended family. I wondered what due diligence the Winthrops had performed on their daughter's fiancé. What version of Carter Williams had they investigated? The Stanford MBA with impressive connections and growing investment firm? Or the financially manipulative social climber who had built his position on stolen money and fraudulent representations? My fingers hovered over the keyboard as a plan began taking shape in my mind. Not a public confrontation. That would only cast me as the bitter ex-fiancé. A role that would diminish me while potentially generating sympathy for Carter. No, this required something more strategic, more precise. A surgical strike at the moment of his greatest triumph. I reached for my phone and texted Layla. "I need your help with a project. Strictly confidential. Are you in?" Her response came immediately. Always. Especially if it involves making that sociopath pay. As I began compiling documents into a secure folder, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Carter's betrayal. A sense of reclaiming my own power. He had taken much from me. My trust. My money. My plans for the future. But he had forgotten what had made me successful in the first place. My intelligence, my persistence, and my unwillingness to be anyone's victim. The Winthrop-Williams wedding would indeed be an event to remember. Just not for the reasons the happy couple anticipated. The morning after discovering the extent of Carter's financial manipulations, I awoke with purpose rather than despair. The fog of heartbreak hadn't lifted entirely. 3 years of memories and shattered dreams couldn't be erased overnight. But anger had become my ally, focusing my thoughts and steadying my hands as I began methodically documenting every aspect of Carter's fraudulent activities. My penthouse, once our shared space filled with photos of our travels and plans for our future home, had become command central for what Layla had dubbed Operation Karma. We had removed all traces of Carter weeks ago in a tearful purge facilitated by several bottles of champagne and a bonfire on my private rooftop terrace. Now the dining table was covered with financial spreadsheets, corporate filings, and the legal framework of Carter's deception. He created 7 different shell companies, Layla noted, tapping her pen against a complex organizational chart we had constructed, all with variations of legitimate-sounding investment names, all ultimately controlled by him. The classic onion structure, I agreed, referring to the layered approach often used to obscure the true ownership of assets. Peel back one layer, find another company, designed to confuse and discourage further investigation? Unfortunately for Carter, I had built my cybersecurity empire by thinking exactly like the people I was protecting clients against. I understood how digital breadcrumbs worked, how to follow money across seemingly disconnected systems, how to reconstruct a narrative from fragments of data. As we worked, memories of Carter invaded my concentration. The way he would bring me coffee in the morning, claiming he could never get my complicated order right, but always somehow managing to perfect it. The thoughtful gifts that had seemed so personal, first editions of my favorite childhood books, jewelry designed to match significant moments in our relationship, the late-night conversations about our shared vision for philanthropic impact once we were married. Had any of it been real? Or had each gesture been calculated, each gift a down payment on accessing my fortune, each conversation research for his ultimate goal of social advancement? The questions tormented me as we uncovered increasingly damning evidence. Beyond the misappropriation of my investment funds, Carter had apparently used my name and reputation to secure meetings with prominent investors across Silicon Valley. He had implied my involvement in his fund's activities, leveraging my success to build credibility he hadn't earned. Several startups had entrusted him with capital based largely on this implied connection to me, money that had disappeared into the labyrinth of his shell companies. This isn't just unethical, Layla observed as we verified another suspicious transaction. This is potentially criminal. Wire fraud, misrepresentation to investors, possible tax evasion. The realization that I had been engaged to marry a likely criminal added another layer of humiliation to my already bruised spirit. I had built my reputation on integrity and innovation, values Carter had apparently seen as exploitable rather than admirable. Over the following weeks, my investigation expanded beyond financial records. I hired a discreet but thorough private investigator to document Carter's activities in Boston, particularly his interactions with the Winthrop family. The reports painted a clear picture. Carter had completely reinvented himself for his new life. Gone were the occasional references to his middle-class upbringing in Phoenix. Now he spoke of summers in Newport and family connections to historical Boston figures. He had adopted the mannerisms, hobbies, and opinions of the old money circle he so desperately wanted to join. From taking up sailing to developing sudden passionate opinions about boarding schools he'd never attended. Most painful were the photos showing him and Charlotte at events where we had once appeared together. The same charming smile, the same attentive posture, the same look of apparent adoration, all now directed at the woman whose family connections represented the ultimate prize in his social climbing agenda. "You need to see this," Layla said one evening, forwarding an email from our investigator. It contained a transcript from a conversation Carter had had with a colleague at the Boston Yacht Club, captured by our investigator who had posed as a server. "Charlotte's family connections are opening doors I've been knocking on for years," Carter had boasted. "Edward introduced me to the managing partner at Wellington last week. The right handshake in Boston is worth more than a decade grinding in Silicon Valley." "What about your ex?" his companion had asked. "I heard she's quite a force in tech." Carter's response cut through me like a physical blow. "Avery? Smart woman, but new money. Useful for making initial connections but limited ceiling. No matter how rich these tech people get, they're still outsiders to families like the Winthrops. I needed a bridge to that world. and now I've crossed it. I sat in stunned silence, reading and rereading his casual dismissal of our relationship, his cold assessment of my value as merely transactional. The tears that came weren't the desperate sobs of earlier weeks, but something quieter and more profound. Grief for the person I had believed Carter to be, for the future I had imagined with someone who had never actually existed. "That's it," Layla said, her voice tight with fury. "We're destroying him. Completely and permanently." I wiped my tears, a strange calm settling over me as the last lingering doubts about my course of action evaporated. "Yes," I agreed, but not in the way he would expect. Over the next 2 months, as Carter and Charlotte's wedding approached, I refined my strategy. Public humiliation would be temporarily satisfying, but ultimately ineffective against someone as manipulative as Carter. He would find a way to reframe the narrative, to cast himself as the victim of a jealous ex. No, this required something more precise, a targeted strike at the foundation of everything he had built. Not through social media exposés or embarrassing confrontations, but through the one thing Carter couldn't charm his way out of: documented evidence of financial crimes presented to the people whose opinion he valued most. The Winthrops, I explained to Layla as we finalized our plan. Specifically, Edward Winthrop, a former federal prosecutor who built his reputation on financial crime cases and who guards his family's reputation with legendary ferocity. "Will he listen?" Layla asked. "Men like that protect their own." "Carter isn't his own yet," I pointed out. "He's an outsider marrying in. And Edward Winthrop didn't accumulate and preserve a fortune by ignoring evidence of financial impropriety in his immediate circle." The wedding invitation on my desk served as both timeline and target. June 17th at Trinity Church, the culmination of Carter's social climbing strategy, the day he would secure his position in a world that had previously been closed to him. Unless someone provided Edward Winthrop with irrefutable evidence that his future son-in-law was a fraud, a thief, and potentially a criminal. As I compiled the final dossier, hundreds of pages of financial records, corporate filings, witness statements from startup founders who had been misled, and a comprehensive timeline of Carter's activities, I found myself reflecting on the woman I had been when I first met him. Successful professionally but insecure socially, aware of my status as an outsider in elite circles despite my wealth, eager for validation from someone who seemed to navigate that world effortlessly. Carter had identified those vulnerabilities with predatory precision. He had offered exactly what I had unconsciously craved: acceptance into a world that had always viewed me as an interloper despite my financial success. He had made me believe that our love transcended class boundaries, all while plotting to use me as a stepping stone to the position he truly desired. The night before the wedding, I sat alone on my terrace overlooking San Francisco Bay, the completed dossier resting on the table beside me. Tomorrow, Carter Williams would face the consequences of his actions. Not through a dramatic scene or public humiliation, but through the cold, hard evidence of his own moral bankruptcy presented to the man whose approval he most desperately sought. Was any of it real? I whispered to the night sky, allowing myself one final moment of vulnerability before executing my plan. Had he ever loved me at all? Or had every kiss, every promise, every moment of apparent intimacy been a calculated move in his long game? The question lingered unanswered as I picked up my phone to confirm the final arrangements. Whatever truth lay in Carter's heart, if any genuine emotion had ever existed there, would remain a mystery. But his future? That was something I could still shape, even from a distance. Tomorrow, while Carter stood at the altar of Trinity Church believing he had achieved everything he had schemed for, the foundations of his carefully constructed facade would begin crumbling beneath him. Not with a dramatic confrontation, but with the quiet precision of documented truth placed in the hands of the one person whose opinion could destroy everything he had worked for. The venerable Trinity Church in Boston's Copley Square stood resplendent in the June sunshine, its Romanesque architecture a testament to old Boston's wealth and traditions. From my position across the square, partially obscured by a historical tour group, I watched the wedding guests arrive in a parade of luxury vehicles and designer attire. The social elite of Boston, New York, and beyond, Names from finance, politics, and centuries-old family dynasties gathered to witness the union of Charlotte Winthrop and Carter Williams. My heart hammered against my ribs as I spotted Carter emerging from a vintage Rolls-Royce, looking every inch the Boston Brahmin in his bespoke morning suit. The confidence in his stride, the easy smile as he greeted guests, nothing in his demeanor suggested a man who had built his position on fraud and deception. For a painful moment, I was transported back to our own engagement party, when he had looked at me with that same expression of triumphant joy. "Target acquired," came Layla's voice through my earpiece. She was positioned closer to the church entrance, disguised as a wedding photographer's assistant. "The father of the bride just arrived. Marcus is approaching now." Marcus Chen, no relation, a former FBI financial crimes specialist now working for my security firm, had been carefully selected for this mission. With his impeccable credentials and understated authority, he would present the dossier to Edward Winthrop in a way that demanded serious attention rather than dismissal. Through my specialized directional microphone disguised as a tourist camera, I listened as Marcus approached Edward Winthrop on the church steps. "Mr. Winthrop, my apologies for the intrusion on this significant day," Marcus began, his voice professionally neutral. "I'm here representing a client who believes you should have this information before the ceremony proceeds. It concerns your future son-in-law's financial activities." Edward Winthrop, imposing even in his 60s, fixed Marcus with a cold stare. "Young man, this is hardly the time or place." "Sir, I understand completely," Marcus continued smoothly, unfazed. "However, as a former federal prosecutor specializing in financial crimes, I believed you would want to review evidence of wire fraud, investor misrepresentation, and potential money laundering before welcoming the perpetrator into your family." That captured Winthrop's attention. His expression shifted from irritation to focused interest, the prosecutor's instinct overriding the father of the bride's desire for an unblemished day. "5 minutes," he said tersely, leading Marcus to a private corner of the church courtyard. Through my earpiece, I heard the abbreviated presentation, Marcus highlighting key documents, explaining the money trail, presenting statements from defrauded investors, and finally, revealing Carter's recorded conversation dismissing the Winthrops as his final conquest in social climbing. Edward Winthrop's response was measured but decisive. "I need to verify these allegations immediately. The ceremony begins in 30 minutes. The complete dossier has been delivered to your home office," Marcus informed him. "Your security head has confirmed receipt. Additionally, digital copies have been sent to your personal email with verification codes that will be provided separately." Winthrop nodded sharply. "Wait here." I watched as he pulled out his phone and stepped further away, presumably calling his house to confirm the delivery. When he returned to Marcus, his expression had hardened into something flinty and determined. "Your client," he said carefully. "I assume it's Ms. Chen?" Marcus neither confirmed nor denied, maintaining professional discretion. Winthrop continued, "Tell your client that the information will be thoroughly reviewed. The ceremony will proceed as planned to avoid public speculation. What happens afterward is a family matter." As Marcus departed and Winthrop rejoined the wedding party, I felt an unexpected weight lift from my shoulders. The dossier was in the right hands. What happened next was beyond my control. And somehow, that realization was liberating. I had not acted from petty vengeance, but from a place of justice. Carter's fate now rested with the very people he had sought to impress and deceive. "Phase 1 complete," Layla confirmed through my earpiece. "What now?" "Now we wait," I replied, moving toward the small cafe across from the church where we had reserved a discreet table with a clear view of the proceedings. The ceremony began precisely on schedule, the historic church filling with music as the wedding party proceeded down the aisle. From my position, I could see only glimpses through the open doors. Charlotte in her designer gown, Carter standing at the altar with practiced poise, Edward Winthrop's rigid posture as he escorted his daughter to her groom. Nothing in the proceedings suggested that anything was amiss. The exchange of vows, the applause as the newly married couple exited the church, all followed the expected script of Boston high society's wedding of the season. It was during the reception at the Winthrop estate, an event I monitored through our carefully placed sources rather than personal observation, that the carefully constructed facade began to crumble. According to our informant, a caterer with a wireless communication device, Edward Winthrop had been engaged in intense conversation with his family lawyers throughout the cocktail hour. Charlotte had noticed her father's distraction, but attributed it to emotional response to giving away his daughter. Carter, flush with triumph at his successful ascension to the Winthrop inner circle, had been working the room with practiced charm. The confrontation came during what should have been Edward's father of the bride's speech. Standing before the assembled guests, Boston's oldest money and most powerful families, he began conventionally enough, welcoming guests and speaking of his love for Charlotte. Then his tone shifted. "Marriage is built on trust," he stated, his voice carrying across the hushed ballroom. "On honesty, transparency, and shared values. The Winthrop family has maintained its position through generations by adhering to principles of integrity in both personal and professional matters." Carter's smile reportedly faltered as Edward fixed him with a prosecutor's stare. "It has come to my attention that my new son-in-law may not share these foundational values," Edward continued, his voice now steel beneath the civilized veneer. "Immediately following this reception, Carter will be joining me and our family attorneys in my study to address certain financial discrepancies that have been brought to my attention. In the meantime, I've instructed our legal team to prepare emergency adjustments to the prenuptial agreement, which must be signed before sunset." The stunned silence that followed was broken by Charlotte's confused questions to her father, Carter's attempts at deflection, and the inevitable wave of whispers spreading through Boston's elite like wildfire. By evening's end, according to our source, 3 significant developments had occurred. Carter had signed an emergency prenuptial agreement, essentially cutting him off from any meaningful access to Winthrop assets. Edward had contacted former colleagues at the Justice Department regarding potential financial crimes, and Charlotte, confronted with evidence of her new husband's fraudulent history and his recorded comments about using the Winthrop name as his final conquest, had retreated to her childhood bedroom in tears, their honeymoon plans indefinitely suspended. As these reports reached me in my hotel suite across town, I felt no triumph or vindication, only a profound weariness and the beginning of something that might eventually become healing. Carter's downfall brought me no joy, but the justice of it provided a sense of closure that my tears and rage had not. I had not destroyed Carter Williams. His own actions, his own choices, his own moral bankruptcy had done that. I had merely ensured that the truth found him at what should have been his moment of greatest victory. As I packed my bag to catch the red-eye back to San Francisco, I paused at the window overlooking historic Boston, a city built on old money and older traditions. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine the alternate reality. If Carter had truly loved me, if we had built a life together based on genuine connection rather than his calculated ambition, the pain of that lost possibility still ached, but it no longer threatened to consume me. My phone buzzed with a text from Layla. "Justice served. Coming home?" Yes, I was going home. To the life I had built through genuine innovation and hard work, to the friends who had supported me through my darkest moments, to a future unburdened by the weight of someone else's deception. Carter had once dismissed me as new money, with a limited ceiling. He had seen my outsider status in elite circles as a deficiency rather than what it truly was, the mark of someone who had created value rather than merely inheriting it. In his pursuit of social acceptance, he had failed to recognize the true source of strength: authenticity and integrity, qualities no amount of family connections or social positioning could provide. As my plane lifted off from Boston Logan International Airport, I felt myself rising above the pain that had defined the past months. Carter Williams had taken much from me: my trust, my love, pieces of my heart I might never fully recover. But he had failed to take the essence of who I was, the resilience that had carried me from my immigrant parents' humble beginnings to the success I had built on my own terms. Whatever came next for Carter, whether legal consequences, social ostracism, or some negotiated settlement with the Winthrop family, was no longer my concern. My own path forward lay elsewhere, illuminated by hard-earned wisdom about who deserved my trust and what constituted true value in relationships. The betrayal had nearly broken me. The recovery would make me unbreakable. 6 months after the Winthrop-Williams wedding that had ended in private disaster but public pretense, I stood on the balcony of my new home in Malibu, watching Pacific waves crash against the shoreline. The sea air carried away the last lingering vestiges of the anxiety that had plagued me since Carter's betrayal, replaced by a growing sense of peace I had once thought impossible. The aftermath of my revenge had unfolded in ways I hadn't anticipated. True to his heritage as Boston aristocracy, Edward Winthrop had managed the public narrative with careful precision. The newlyweds had postponed their honeymoon for business opportunities, according to the society pages. No public scandal erupted. No embarrassing headlines featured the Winthrop name. Behind closed doors, however, the consequences had been swift and severe. Through industry connections, I learned that Carter had been forced to resign from his position at the investment firm he had started with my money, the board citing irregularities in financial reporting as the official reason. The Winthrop family lawyers had negotiated a separation agreement that included comprehensive NDAs and a financial settlement returning the majority of misappropriated funds to the investors Carter had defrauded, including me. Charlotte had filed for annulment within 3 weeks of the wedding, the papers sealed by judicial order, but the whispers inevitable in tight-knit Boston society. Carter had disappeared from public view, reportedly relocating to a Williams family property in rural Vermont, while federal investigators reviewed his financial activities. I had received a single communication from Edward Winthrop, a brief, formal email acknowledging the return of my investment funds and expressing, in carefully measured language, appreciation for the pertinent information provided regarding Mr. Williams's business practices. No apology for his daughter's role in my heartbreak, no warmth beyond professional courtesy, but a clear acknowledgement that my actions had been justified. My phone chimed with an incoming call, Layla checking in from our new venture capital offices in San Francisco. The Rivera deal just closed, she announced without preamble. $15 million in funding for women-led healthcare tech startups, with preferred investor status for us in the next round. That's fantastic, I replied, genuine excitement replacing the professional numbness that had characterized my first months after Carter's betrayal. Maria Rivera has been trying to get that funding for years. Well, turns out having Avery Chen as a founding investor opens doors that previously remained closed, Layla noted with satisfaction. Your reputation for ethical tech investments is exactly what they were looking for. After returning from Boston, I had channeled my emotional energy into creating Phoenix Ventures, a fund specifically dedicated to supporting women and minority founders in tech, entrepreneurs whose brilliance was often overlooked by traditional venture capital. The work had become both healing and purpose, transforming my personal pain into opportunity for others who, like me, had faced barriers based on who they were, rather than what they could achieve. The irony wasn't lost on me that Carter's dismissal of my new money status as limiting had ultimately proven false. While his social climbing ambitions had collapsed around him, my focus on creating genuine value had only strengthened my position in the industry I loved. The Forbes profile comes out next week, Layla continued. They're calling you the conscience of Silicon Valley in the headline. Not bad for someone who was barely functioning 6 months ago. I smiled at her gentle teasing. The depth of my emotional collapse after Carter's betrayal had frightened both of us. Days when I couldn't leave my bed, nights spent staring at walls, questioning every decision, every relationship, every moment of what I had believed was love. I had good help, I acknowledged softly. The therapy sessions, the friends who had refused to let me isolate, the family support that reminded me where I had come from and what I had already overcome, all had been crucial to rebuilding myself from the shattered pieces Carter had left behind. As the sun began setting over the Pacific, casting golden light across my new beginning, I reflected on the lessons of the past year. I had learned that money, regardless of whether it was new or old, couldn't protect against heartbreak. That success without integrity was merely elaborate failure waiting to be exposed. That true strength came not from social position, but from the ability to rise after falling, to rebuild after destruction. My parents had arrived in America with nothing but determination and hope. They had built a life through honest work and unwavering principles, values they had instilled in me long before I built my tech fortune. Carter had seen those values as quaint limitations, impediments to the social acceptance he craved. In the end, it was his moral bankruptcy, not my outsider status, that had determined our respective fates. The wound of his betrayal would always be part of my story. The questions about what had been real and what had been calculated might never find complete answers. But those uncertainties no longer defined me or limited my future. My phone chimed again with a text from my mother. "Dad and I landed. On our way to you now. Bringing your favorite dumplings from that place in Chinatown." I smiled, feeling a rush of gratitude for the authentic connections that sustained me. Carter had once subtly encouraged distance between me and my family, positioning their immigrant mannerisms and straightforward values as embarrassments to be managed rather than foundations to be honored. Now I recognized that attempted separation for what it was, an effort to isolate me from those who saw through his carefully constructed persona. As I prepared to welcome my parents to my new home, I glanced one last time at the horizon, where ocean met sky in seamless transition. 6 months ago, I had believed Carter's betrayal was an ending, of love, of trust, of my capacity for happiness. Standing now in the gathering twilight, I understood it had actually been a beginning. Painful, unwanted, but ultimately transformative. The woman who had naively trusted a social climber with her heart and fortune no longer existed. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more discerning about who deserved access to either. Carter Williams had sought to use me as a stepping stone to the world he coveted. Instead, he had become a painful but necessary lesson in my journey to becoming the woman I was meant to be all along. Powerful, not despite being an outsider, but because of the unique perspective that position provided. As the first stars appeared above the Pacific, I turned away from the view and toward my future, a path illuminated by hard-earned wisdom and the profound understanding that true worth could never be measured by social acceptance or family connections, only by the integrity with which one navigated life's inevitable betrayal.